Welcome back to episode 34 of the Bound to Improve podcast, where we read a book a week and we break down the challenging, complex ideas in that book and turn them into actionable steps for progress. My name is Chris Pound.
My name is Landon Eller.
And the book that we will continue to be talking about this week is Jim Camp's Start With No.
Yeah, Jim Camp was a top-tier negotiation coach, known for coaching Fortune 500 executives, FBI negotiating teams, and many, many more. So just a quick recap of what we got into last week. We covered 6 main points. First was the idea that Jim Camp challenged the win-win mindset. Growing up, we all thought win-win meant it's everybody wins. It's awesome. That's what you want to strive for. And it sounds collaborative, but it often leads to weak outcomes. There's always value that's left on the table with a win-win negotiation. And we brought up the example of splitting a pizza. So there's a 6-slice pizza, and say I'm really hungry, so I want 4. Chris isn't that hungry, he just ate, so he only wants 2. But in terms of win-win, we split it 3-3. Doing that, we use value on the table because I'm not full now, and Chris overate.
Yeah. So meaning that you don't really need to compromise all the time in a negotiation. You kind of need to understand the adversary or the other person on the other end of the negotiation in order to fully maximize the deal.
Yeah, you need to start with no.
Yes. Moving on here, we have the neediness is the biggest threat in a negotiation. The moment you need the deal, that's when you've given up all your power and control. Want is calm and strategic. Need is desperate and emotional. And the last thing you want to do in a negotiation is show emotion, right? Make emotional decisions. That's one of the big no-nos in Jim Camp's system here. You have to have a good understanding of your own emotions and be able to control your emotions so they don't flare up in the heat of the negotiation.
Yeah, next we got into the Columbo effect, or making the other side feel okay. And Columbo was in a fictional TV show where the main character, who was Columbo, was a detective, and he would often go up to his clients or his suspects' doors to interview him, and he would walk away and then have to come back to the door, re-knock on it, and ask one of the most important questions. Why did he do this? He wanted to make himself feel, make the other person feel that he was more human, he was fallible, he was prone to mistakes. So that made the person drop the barriers and share the information that he really needed to know.
Yeah, moving on, we have start with no as a strategic advantage. Yes and maybe, they're often dishonest and simply unclear. No sparks a real thinking and often moves the conversation forward. Getting a no right out the gate is oftentimes better than a yes or maybe, because no is a straightaway answer. Yes and maybe, they kind of leave things up to assumptions or interpretations, and sometimes those things don't work out all the time. So, Jim Camp really says you need to strive for a no. Give the adversary 3 different opportunities to say no to in the negotiation. Get that out of the way early so you can really you can get past their smokescreen per se and find out what their real pain is.
Yeah, and with that, the no, once you get that, then you can go find the exact problem and work to solve it so you can finish the negotiation. Then we also got into something we've talked about countless times throughout our episodes, is mission and purpose. But this is specifically tailored towards having a mission and purpose for the negotiation. And this acts as your internal compass. So any decision you walk up against, you know right away whether you can just say yes or no, because you already have defined your mission and purpose. So it acts as a guiding light.
Yeah, and lastly here, you need to let go of the outcome, right? Focus on your behavior rather than the total outcome of the negotiation. You can't control results, but you can control how you show up and the attitude that you bring to the negotiation, the preparation that you have gone through in order to know fully what you're trying to negotiate on. Think about it just kind of like a game of golf. You don't focus on the total score at the end. You focus on one swing at a time. That's what negotiation is all about, right? Just little steps, little details at a time, and you'll eventually get to the big picture.
Yeah, and so in this episode, we're going to build on all of those previous points that we talked about by diving into Camp's system fuels and how to ask the right questions, staying calm and neutral under pressure, and behavioral habits that give you control without being controlling.
Once you stop trying to control the outcome and shift your focus to your own behavior, the next question becomes, what should this behavior actually look like?
Yeah, so according to Camp, it starts with asking the right questions, not pitching or persuading, about asking. This is all about the fuels of the system, and you can think about these as behavioral habits you can use to peel back the adversary's layers, uncover what really matters to that other side, and keep the conversation moving forward with 100% clarity and control.
Yeah, the best negotiators, they don't talk, they listen. They listen for the opportunity to ask better questions, or they pull out the really good questions from other questions that they've asked in the beginning. And we'll kind of get more into that, whether it's nurturing or connecting or the 3+ method. All of these kind of things, they play into each other. So you have to understand that you need to be doing less talking and more listening.
Yeah, so I'm going to pose a question. How do you think you make your own decisions? And Camp argues that it's about you have to develop your own perspective in order to make a decision. So once you are able to peer into the adversary's perspectives, you need to do this by asking questions. Then once you are inside their head, you have to lead them to 100% clear vision so they can make a decision.
Yeah, the goal is to understand their world and help them see their own situation more clearly. Later on, we'll kind of talk about painting their pain, but this is just a good introductory to that lesson.
Yeah, so think about it. When you make a decision to buy a house, you have a vision for it. You see your kids run around the backyard, or you see that sweet basement that can be developed into a weight room or a man cave. It's all about developing that perspective in order to influence your decision. So going to the next point here, how do you get inside the adversary's perspective? And this is through, as we mentioned previously, asking the right questions. And this is both an art and a science form.
The science side of it is how you actually construct the question. You do not want to lead a question with a verb, because this kind of initiates a one-word response. Like, is it hot outside today?
Yeah, most people are just going to respond yes.
Yes. And you can't play off of yes. I mean,
you learn nothing about
absolutely nothing
what the other person's thinking.
And the key to asking good questions is being able to dissect their answer and pull out another question. You kind of just keep building these questions based off of how they're answering your first initial question.
Yeah, so here you want to lead with open-ended, interrogative-led questions, which is your 5 W's. So who, what, when, where, which, plus
H,
which is how.
Yes.
And these short questions are going to lead to honest answers.
Yes, and this brings us to the art of question asking, and it's more about how the question is conveyed. And Jim Camp's system, there are 4 different question fuels. You have nurturing, reversing, connecting, and then the 3+ rule. Starting off with nurturing is your ability to stay calm and comfortable and to keep the dialogue open, right? If the person is comfortable in the negotiation or the conversation, they're going to let you in on themselves more than when you're kind of showing your teeth per se, right? They're going to close themselves off, and you're not going to be able to truly figure out what the problem is in the first place.
Yeah, then he goes into reversing, and this is gently answering a question with another question to gain more clarity. So instead of when they ask you a question, just kind of turn it back on them so you don't expose any important information, and then they're ultimately going to be responsible for answering the question, which will again gain more insights into their thinking, who they are, etc.
Yeah, moving on to the third one here is connecting. This is when someone puts out a floating remark to get something out of you, but instead of revealing information, they kind of answer with a "and," which it just keeps the conversation going, right? It kind of makes, it's a little bit of an awkward pause, but that's a psychological thing, right? Nobody likes silence because it's awkward. So if you kind of delay your next little sentence or your next word that you're going to, or the next negotiation part you're going to talk about, you're going to get more information out of them.
Yeah.
Because they don't like awkward silence, and so they're going to start spilling their beans per se.
Yeah. The adversary kind of puts out that floating remark, and then they're trying to get something out of you.
Yes.
Okay. And then lastly was the 3+ rule, and here it's just reiterating your point 3 times to ensure that they confirm. really give them the chance to say no, so they can't go back on it and kind of change their mind, or for sure that they're 100% open to whatever you're posing your point to.
Asking great questions in the right tone is very, very powerful. But what really gives you that extra little edge on your adversary is what's happening in your own mind. Here we will dive into why it is extremely, extremely important that you clear out your head completely out and you walk into your negotiation with a blank slate.
The big idea here is that the best negotiators don't walk in with a plan to impress, they walk in with a clear mind. No assumptions, no expectations, just a blank slate.
Yeah, like Landon mentioned, two things really cloud our judgment in a negotiation. One, assumptions, and two, expectations. Starting with expectations here, they make us emotional, right? When things kind of go off script, they make us rattled. And that's when we start to really struggle in a negotiation or a sales pitch. Because when you start going off script and you kind of are dealing with objections that you weren't really expecting, you really do get rattled. And so coming in with no expectations or no assumptions will give you the ability to kind of keep your composure.
Or just take, for example, like the theme of this book. So say someone says yes to you and you're not able to filter to walk into the negotiation with a blank slate. As soon as someone says yes, your expectations are going to skyrocket.
Yeah.
You're going to be filled with a whole bunch of dopamine, and you're going to be like, oh my gosh, like this is awesome. I just closed this deal. But then they come back later and say, actually, we can't really do that. Drops your emotions 100%. Then you're all, like Chris said, rattled, and you don't know what to do next.
Yeah, assumptions, in terms of assumptions, we normally fill in the gaps with what we think is true instead of asking and listening. And this is what leads to the misunderstandings and oftentimes the very bad, poor decisions that we end up making. Because when our assumptions are high and our expectations are high, when things don't go as planned, we kind of get dropped back down to base level, and you're almost disappointed to an extent because you were originally thinking, oh, this is great, right? My expectations are all the way up here, and then, well, actually, we need this, this, and this, and this before we're able to meet you at this. And so if you go in with a blank slate, you're going to have the idea that nothing really matters. I don't need this deal. I want this deal. And it takes your emotional behavior out of it completely.
You might say, like, okay, like that's awesome. Like expectations and assumptions, I don't need them, but how do I make sure they don't creep in? The fix to this is by taking extremely great notes.
Yes.
And the reason behind this is it forces you to actually listen. You're not just waiting for your next turn to speak. And I experienced this firsthand during work last week, and we were in an all-day meeting, and my responsibility was note-taking. And sometimes I felt right away some people were saying stuff, and I had no idea what they were talking about. So my mind started to wander, and the conversation was still going on, but I was missing it because I was going down these rabbit holes in my mind. And it would have all been avoided if I would have just kept being extremely focused on what they're saying and taking great notes.
Yeah, when you write things down, your emotions are calm, your nerves settle, and your focus sharpens. You hear what's really being said rather than what you think should be or what you expect to be hearing.
Yeah, so with a clear head and no assumptions now, you're ready to uncover what really brings people to the table, because at the heart of every negotiation is one thing, and this is pain. And this next section is about how to find it and what to do when you find it and how to work with it.
The next big idea that Jim Camp talks about is know their pain and then paint their pain. All decisions start with a problem. Your job is to help the other side see it more clearly. And what does this kind of mean? With no vision, three things occur. When you have no vision, there's no action. When there's no vision, there's no direction. When there's no vision, there is no deals that stick.
So what do you need a vision of? This is the pain. Every negotiation exists because of pain. Either something that's current or a problem that's inherent and definitely going to happen in the future. And it's all relevant because of pain. And I'm going to go back to the example that when I was in that all-day meeting at work, they were working on how do we make ourselves known, and they just had to find a way to extract their pain so they could really paint that for them, show them what their competitors and their current providers, how they were doing something wrong, so then we could go fix the pain points.
You are never going to be able to sell a solution to their problem if the adversary doesn't truly understand the problems to begin with. This is the whole idea about painting their pain.
Yeah, so because the easier that the vision of their pain is painted by way of asking questions, which we talked about in the previous section, the easier the decision making process is going to be. If they see their pain 100% clear on the wall, then it's just going to be a simple yes, we'll rock with you guys, or yes, they'll agree to the terms that you're providing.
Yeah, your challenge as a negotiator is to discover and paint your adversary the clearest possible picture of their pain, because the clearer the vision of their pain, the easier the decision-making process will be for your adversary, right? You'll get quicker responses, you'll get quicker outcomes, you'll get quicker decisions.
Once you clearly made the adversary see their pain, the natural instinct is to start solving for it. However, one critical question that you need to ask yourself before this happens is, am I even talking to the right person? For example, like take if you are talking to a person, but they're not even the decision maker. So you're hoping to paint their pain, but they're not going to be the one that's going to agree to the negotiation or say yes to the deal that you're proposing. So before you go wasting all your time painting someone else's pain that's not going to really matter, you need to find who really matters in the decision-making process and try to stop wasting time in what Jim Camp calls the shell game.
Yeah, never assume that the person you're talking to is the person who can actually say yes to what you're offering. Camp calls this, like Landon mentioned, the shell game. And in many organizations, the real decision maker is hidden under layers of blockers and middlemen. In negotiation, if you're talking to the wrong person, you're wasting your time, your energy, and your leverage. 3 things that you really can never get back, especially your time and your energy. So you need to be extremely diligent on who you're actually talking to. There are different ways to go about finding who the actual decision maker is, and we'll kind of talk about that. But it is extremely important to never assume that the person you were originally talking to is the person who can make that decision.
Yeah, the example that Jim provided in the book was that he was once a recruiter for the legendary Ohio State coach Woody Hayes, and they were looking at this running back from California named Freeman McNeil, and he was a running back who eventually played on the Jets, and they loved everything about this guy. So Jim went around asking the principal, the coach, his parents, like, hey, who's going to be the most influential in his decision, or ultimately making the decision for him? And he said, and they all came back and said, Freeman's going to be the one who ultimately makes the last decision. But then they got to a final stage, so Woody Hayes flew out and was able to sit down with their family, and Freeman's girlfriend was there, and she was attending. Woody asked her, hey, where are you going to school at? And she replied, oh, I'm going to theater school at UCLA. And this got Woody thinking, like, she's going to go to theater school in one of the best places to do it, like right next to...
She's going to be a Hollywood actor.
Yeah.
Yeah, so Hayes knew that no matter how many different people he was talking to, there was only one person who was really going to make this decision or really influence the decision to be made, which was
his girlfriend. And he ultimately did go to UCLA, and when Woody and Jim walked out of there, they spent no more time and effort because it was basically a done deal.
Yeah, so this goes on to how do you get through the shell game? You need to ask direct but respectful questions like who else would need to be involved before a final decision is made. Keep asking until you know exactly who needs to say yes or no to the negotiation.
Now, this is 100% true, but this doesn't mean you have to go find the decision maker right away and outreach to them right away. You can go to a more junior employee and get the connections going.
Build the rapport with that employee to help you get your leverage up in order to get to the top guy.
Or just think about it in terms of like reaching out to them too. Like if you reach out to the CEO or the chief product officer or something like that, they probably get emails all the time asking for people to talk to them, or because they're the real decision makers. But how about the junior employees? Yeah. Could you imagine like someone reaching out to them and wanting to talk? They're going to be like 100% yes. And then when they show you what they're about, they're going to go get that decision maker and pull them down.
Yeah.
So you'll be in 100% more likely.
Yeah, once you figured out who really has all the power, it's time to make the most of every conversation. This is where the agenda comes in, because walking into a negotiation without one is like walking into a game that has no rules.
So here you have to have an agenda and be able to work it. Negotiation by itself can feel chaotic, but an agenda gives you a game plan. It gives you a checklist of things that you need to do, and you can focus 100% on those ideas. Especially when things start to stray away from your points, you can refer back to the agenda and get back on track.
So why does having an agenda matter? Without an agenda, most conversations, they end up getting hijacked by distractions, whether it's a vague comment or just simply an unspoken assumption. There are many different things that will ultimately take your time and your energy away from the most important details of that negotiation.
Yeah, both parties should agree on it here. And this doing so keeps everybody emotionally steady, prevents that scope creep, and builds trust through 100% transparency about what you're going to tackle.
Yeah, Camp says you need to have a shared agenda, not a one-side checklist, but a plan for both parties to understand and agree upon. Camp says agendas have 5 different parts: problems, our baggage, their baggage, what we want, and what happens next. Starting off with problems, what do we have?
So problems, baggage, and their baggage can all kind of be lumped together. So problems is about addressing concerns early to build that trust. So take, for example, if your firm kind of did something wrong in one aspect when dealing with another firm like 10 years ago, but you know deep down that they kind of still hold that, just address that problem up front and be like, I know what happened 10 years ago. We have developed as a company, and we're changed, and we're going to work to solve that and be the best partner that we can be with you.
Yeah, think about Apple's battery gate and the early 2010s, when they were essentially slowing down everybody's iPhone and pretty much requiring them to upgrade their phones. It was a huge thing, and they had to address this problem. They had to come out and admit that they were slowing down people's older iPhones in order to require them to get the new iPhones. They addressed that problem. They understood that they made the mistake and they moved on. And seemingly nobody really cares anymore.
Yeah, then the next one here is our baggage. So this is, you have to be honest about anything on your end that could create tension. So take, as we're young on the younger side, take inexperience, for example. If you're dealing with a more senior person and we're going to be in a meeting with them, address that right away. Say, I know we are rather inexperienced. Is there anything I can do to kind of make you feel more valued or less concerned with my inexperience to make this partnership work better?
The third part of the agendas is their baggage. And you may not know this yet, but you need to be ready to uncover it through conversations and questions. This can help explain pushbacks or even hidden resistance, almost like a smoke screen, right? Maybe they'd been taken advantage of in the past, and so they're kind of hesitant on whether they should accept this deal or negotiate better terms or full out just throw the negotiation out the window.
Then number 4, you have to really put into detail what you or we want. And if you don't clearly define what you're asking for, you can't expect to get it. If you leave some vague or ambiguous assumption up in the air, then no one's going to really know what you're asking for, and it's not going to go, the deal, the negotiation is not going to go anywhere. So as simple as putting it in the agenda can align expectations on, you're going to talk about this, and you're going to both walk away with a clear definition of what you want and possibly even the other side wants.
And to wrap up the 5 parts of the agenda, lastly, we have what happens next. Most deals fall apart because of vague or unforgotten follow-ups. This is when you need to use Camp's 3+ method. Clarify your next steps 3 different times, right? Give them the opportunity to say no. Give them opportunity to give you objections or to kind of sweeten the deal for either side. This is extremely important so no detail gets lost. Moving on to our implementation from part 1 of last week's Start With No by Jim Camp. For me, mine was to understand my mission and purpose for my summer job. I've been working for going on about 2 weeks now, and I'm still kind of trying to refine my mission and purpose, but I think I do have a clear idea of what I am trying to provide for my clients. And so just being able to convey that value is something that I am going to continue to try and work on.
Sweet. So I got a couple updates here. For one was weekly rethinking time, and that was from Think Again by Adam Grant. And here, me and Chris kind of rethought about everything that we do in terms of the podcast, in terms of how we record the episodes, how we're naming the episodes, how we're working social media, what's next in the pipeline. So we spent a decent amount of time.
85 minutes. We had timed it out, right? Because we are so busy, we are stretching ourselves so thin that we need to have time frames and deadlines on things in order to fully maximize our time and our energy. Otherwise, again, we get distracted. And yesterday, I had a little bit of a distraction, but once I was able to kind of calm my nerves and my emotions, we were able to get directly into our quote-unquote meeting.
And then the next update I have was back from the anatomy of a swipe. It was our goal to kind of dig into the payments industry a little bit more. So trying to look at Marquetta, and that model is still being developed. So we'll keep you guys updated. And lastly, for this episode, I have a lot of presentations that I'll have to give for work this summer. So framing it in terms of like a negotiation, I think will be good in allowing the other side to start with no right away. So I'm going to see how I can incorporate that throughout the entire summer.
And kind of going on with Landon's implementation from this week's part 2 of Start With No, I want to start paying it forward a few times a week. Now, I mean more than just simply opening up the door for somebody, right? That's pretty much just common courtesy, and I realize that not a lot of people might thank you or really even pay much attention to it, but I want to do a little bit more, right? Because Camp mentions he had like a whole chapter on paying it forward, right? You're really not able to pay someone back sufficiently, and so it goes back to doing things and not really expecting anything out of it. Do things that make you feel good inside, whether it's to give a couple dollars to a homeless person, or to buy basketball for a little kid because they may not have the funds or the ability or the resources in order to purchase that basketball. It doesn't matter. It's just the idea of doing something for someone else and not expecting anything out of it.
Yeah, this is a perfect transition into our quotes, and we might have hit on a few of these last week, but following up on Chris's implementation, one of the quotes I have is, "In this world, you must pay forward because you can't really pay others back, not sufficiently." So think about it in terms of what can you do on a daily basis to brighten someone's day.
Yeah.
My other quote here is from Vince Lombardi, and I think I touched on this last week, but winning isn't everything, but the will to prepare is. And this is talking about the point where don't get so caught up on the outcomes, focus on each individual mechanism that you do to prepare. Just like a golf, like you said, focus on doing this swing to the best of your ability and let the score take care of itself.
That was good. That was a good little add. My quote for this week was, the most successful people deal with the most difficult problems directly. What does this mean for someone like me? Well, I find myself a lot of times kind of avoiding the big problems and pushing them and kind of procrastinating on them. And, for example, yesterday when we had our little meeting, we have problems within our systems and our agendas and our deadlines. We need to face these problems head on and deal with them and just get them out of the way. We've pushed things back, we've pushed things off, we've canceled things for one reason or another, and we need to just dig in and grind it out because, like I mentioned before, we're building a foundation for whether it's our personal brand or our life or spiritual or emotional. It doesn't matter. It's the idea that everybody has problems, and you need to deal with your problems head on and directly.
So that wraps up this week's episode of Bound to Improve, where we covered some of the main ideas from Start With No by Jim Camp. The next book we're going to delve into is Food Can Fix It by Dr. Oz. This book is broken into 3 parts: how food really impacts your body, then the right types of food to look for, and then his plan on how to implement his teachings.
That pretty much wraps up this episode. Don't forget to check us out on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcast, all at Bound to Improve. And we look forward to seeing you next week.